All right, in this video, we'll be focusing on the forms of the Canterbury Tales, or the genres that this text makes use of. One of the most important forms or genres that this text participates in is that of the frame narrative. Some of you may have encountered this in other texts that you've read. And this is certainly not something that Chaucer has invented. It precedes him, and he's kind of copying other texts, other authors. Some of you might be familiar with, the Thousand and One Nights. That's a frame narrative. We have Scheherazade telling a story to prevent Shahryar from killing her. So she tells new stories every night to keep herself alive. So that results in numerous stories being told within the frame of Shahrazad and Shahryar. One of the more nearby precedents for Chaucer would be the Italian author Boccaccio, whose Decameron tells the story of 10 aristocrats who leave a city that has been afflicted by plague, and they tell each other stories to pass the time while they're in quarantine. So it is a really kind of timely text in that way. So Chaucer's participating in this idea of a frame in which we have an outer story that facilitates the telling of many stories inside of that outer story. In the Canterbury Tales, and some of you may know this already, the frame is that we have a collection of pilgrims from London traveling to Canterbury on a pilgrimage. This is a kind of mixture of a pious activity that they're choosing to do to kind of express their devotion, but it's also a really good reason for a trip. So there's this kind of vacation element to taking a pilgrimage as well. And at the beginning of the story, as they're traveling, the innkeeper of a hotel in Southwark, where they all stayed the night before, tells them that whoever can tell the best story on this trip will get a free meal. And so this is the kind of premise of why everyone's telling stories in the Canterbury Tale to begin with. And the host's exact words are that he wants to hear the story with the best sentence and the most solace. And that's Middle English for the best moral and the most entertainment. He's looking for stories that have a moral and have entertainment. Some pilgrims are more successful than others. You can be thinking of those criteria as you read The Man of Law and the Wife of Bath's tale. The thing about frame narratives in particular is that they enable multiple genres to come together in one story. So whereas the past things we've read kind of conform to a single genre, the Canterbury Tales collects many different genres within it, including some of the genres that we've encountered before, like the lay and romance and Arthurian legend. And then the final thing about this frame narrative is that Chaucer didn't finish it. He wasn't able to finish it, or he didn't want to finish it. We don't really know what the reason is. He intended to write 4 tales for each of his 29 pilgrims, which comes out to 116 tales, but only 24 tales were written. About 1 per pilgrim, but not even every pilgrim ultimately got a tale. So it's much shorter than he imagined. And again, we're not entirely sure why he chose to do that. Because it is a frame narrative, and we have multiple stories within the larger story, one thing I want us to pay attention to is how these tales talk to each other. Because sometimes we tell stories to send someone a message. If someone keeps arriving late to a class, for example, I might tell them a story about how after a student arrived to class late, 5 times in a row, he was struck by lightning. I'm using that story to communicate a message. And we can look for those kinds of messages in the Canterbury Tales as well. How are the pilgrims using these stories to do things or to tell each other things? Man of Law and Wife of Bath in particular. Another genre that the Canterbury Tales participates in is that of the estates satire, in which this work satirizes what is known as the 3 estates, or the 3 stereotypical classes of late medieval English society. We can kind of roughly categorize those as those who work, like peasants, etc., those who fight, like knights, etc., and those who pray, anyone associated with the church, nuns, monks, priests, summoners, friars, etc. And if you read through the cast of characters in the Canterbury Tales, you'll notice that they all conform to one of these 3 groups, more or less. So we see that the Canterbury Tales is participating in this kind of satire in which The kind of stereotypical features of each of these classes are made fun of. The false piety of people in the church, the sense of chivalry and duty in people who are knights, the opportunism of certain the opportunism of certain artisans as well. All of those things are kind of being made fun of through the estate satire. And I should also mention that this is not a necessarily accurate representation of medieval class. It's a kind of stereotype that is true as a stereotype even in Chaucer's own day, but he's using it to make fun of all kinds of people. In each tale that we'll be reading, we can also point to specific genres. The Man of Law's tale appears to tell what is known as a conversion narrative, the story of someone who is able to convert many people. And The Wife of Bath's prologue and tale kind of touches on numerous contexts and genres. One is this hard to pronounce French term, the querelle des femmes, or the quarrel or dispute about women. This kind of age-old question about women's roles in society and how involved women should be in society. We see The Wife of Bath kind of directly taking on that question about women's rights, feminism, related topics. The sermon is also a genre that gets participated in here. The Wife of Bath is kind of offering her own sermon of a kind. And then finally, The Wife of Bath alludes to anti-feminist literature, such as what gets mentioned in her prologue is this book called The Book of Wicked Wives that she's very upset about and trying to contest in her argumentation. So you can be looking for all of those forms and genres as you read through the Canterbury Tales.